Sayın hocalarım, sevgili öğrenci arkadaşlarım, değerli konuklar. Dokuz Üniversitesi Dilbilim topluluğu olarak bir konferansta daha karşınızdayız. Bugünkü konuğumuz Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nden yardımcı doçent doktor Markus Pöchtrager. Davetimizi kabul edip konuğumuz olduğu için kendisine teşekkür ediyoruz. We are grateful that you accepted our invitation. Bugün bir kez daha İngilizce bir konferansla karşınıza çıkıyoruz. İlk İngilizce konferansımız için çok iyi geri dönüşler almıştık. Bugün de bu denli önemli bir konuda, bu denli yetkin bir konuşmacıyı konuk edebildiğimiz için çok mutluyuz. Sahneyi hocamıza bırakmadan önce kendisiyle ilgili bilgiler vermek istiyorum size. Markus hocamız 2001 yılında Viyana Üniversitesi'nde Dilbilim ve Alman dili ve edebiyatı alanlarında yüksek lisans eşdeğerindeki derecesini tamamladı. Doktorasını 2006 yılında Viyana Üniversitesi'nde de Dilbilim alanında tamamladı. Hocamız uzun yıllar boyunca Boğaziçi Üniversitesi Batı Dilleri ve Edebiyatları bölümünde görev yaptı ve 2014'te bağımsız bir Dilbilim bölümünün kurulmasıyla birlikte Dilbilim bölümü öğretim üyesi olarak görev yapmaya başladı. Kısa bir süre önce de bölüm başkan yardımcılığı görevini üstlendi. Çalışma alanları ses bilim, ses bilimsel üst kuram, ses bilim, için bilim etkileşimi, bilişsel bilim olarak dilbilim, Fink-Ugrik dilleri, İskandinav dilleri ve Türk dilleri. Sözü daha fazla uzatmadan sahneyi kendisine bırakıyorum.
Davet için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Türkçe biliyorum, yani biraz biliyorum en azından. Normalde konuşmak istemiyorum çünkü herkes bana bakıyor. Çok tatlı diyor. O yüzden İngilizce olsun. So I'll thank you very much for the invitation. It's April the 1st, but this is not a joke. And the topic of the talk is what do you mean it's not phonology? Maybe I should explain why I've chosen this topic to begin with, because there is this kind of trend. No, it's not a joke. It's a trend. There is this kind of trend in linguistics. Very often syntacticians deal with a problem. They say, there are some aspects of which we can't really deal with. Let's just say that's morphology. Then the morphologists look at it and they say, okay, some of it we can deal with, but the rest we can't really deal with. Let's say it's phonology. And then it all comes down to us, the phonologists, and we say, we don't want to deal with the things you can't deal with. That's not fair. We have to give some back to you. So what this is a kind of attempt to define what phonology should really be dealing with. So it's an attempt to define what phonology should be about and what it, more importantly, should not be about. Because here is a problem. If you try to come up with a theory that can deal with everything, that is both the things which we think are phonological and the other stuff, if you have a theory that can do that all, you really don't have a theory. Because that means you can do anything you want and the reverse. And to some extent we phonologists are guilty here as well, because for a long time we were greedy and we said we want to explain everything. Everything we can do we will want to do. And that's a bad idea to approach things. And that's what we're going to look at, and I hope that idea or that problem will become clearer as we go on. Can everybody hear me? Is the level okay? So I'm loud enough? Even people on the cheap roads, cheap seats in the back, you can find that. Okay, very good. So, we'll begin with an intro, as is customary in talks. We'll talk about what counts as phonological. We'll look at so-called alternations as a case study, and we'll try to see what we can conclude from it. And let me begin with the intro. What a surprise. Let me begin by asking you a $1 million question. The $1 million question is, how many generative linguists does it take to change a light bulb? It's a typical type of joke. You might have heard this. How many X does it take? Okay. How many generative linguists does it take to change a light bulb? Any guess? One. How did you know? My God, did you see this before? Yes, it is correct. Why one? Well, because the joke goes, he or she just throws up the light bulb and everything else follows from independent principles. We have a big theory and it does everything. We just go chunk and the rest somehow handles itself. The real $1 million question, however, is slightly different. And that's the following. Well, we see linguistics as a science. Like any other science, we have to find principles. We have to come up with generalizations. And usually the assumption is, the more universal, the better that is. So we try to be all-encompassing. We try to generalize as much as we can, to an extent where you could even say, well, what's the worst nightmare of a generative linguist? Well, missing a significant generalization. That's taken from Chomsky. So Chomsky in '64 already said, the goal, the ultimate goal of linguistics is to make significant generalizations. Now that, of course, immediately raises a follow-up question: when is a generalization significant? That is, when should we care? What's important? How do we know? Okay, I make a generalization. For example, in this room there are 15 people with curly hair. It's a generalization. Okay, so why is that interesting? Would anybody need to know that? So how do I know when it's significant, when not? And as people have pointed out fairly early on, that's actually not so clear. So yes, we talk about significant generalizations, but it's not really defined. If you go to the locus classicus of generative phonology, the book by Chomsky and Halle, Sound Pattern of English, they say, well, they are significant when it's something that the child will use to organize data. So if you make a generalization and you can show that that's actually what the child does as well, then that is significant. That was the idea back then. Okay. Now, what would that mean? So, for example, for phonology, what kind of generalizations could we come up with, and which of them might potentially qualify as significant? Well, for example, we could say, in Japanese we have the sounds ts and ch and t, but where one occurs, the other one cannot occur. Okay? So, that's one thing you can say. So before u, you only have ts, before e, you only have ch, elsewhere you have t. Is that relevant? Well, maybe, maybe not. We don't really know. Or, for example, if we look at English, something like strid could be an English word, bnid could not. In Arabic, it's the exact reverse. Strid out, bnid in. Spanish says nada. We don't do any of this. We don't like it. Okay, is that relevant now? Well, we don't know. Or think of how many English words you know that begin with the. Okay, we know the, and then, and they, and this, and those, and then, and they're all function words. Interesting. Is that relevant? Well, how will we know? And it goes on like this. It goes on like this. It also goes on with alternations. So, for example, many languages have what we call vowel reductions. The vowel gets simpler. You have that in Turkish as well. So if you think of a word such as, for example, kalacak, then nobody normally says kalacak. Everybody says kalacak. True? So that would be an example of vowel reduction. And you can say gelecek and you can say gelecek. Also true? But let's try now. What's the word for future in Turkish? Can you say gelecek? Oh God, why can you not do it there? Interesting puzzle. So it works sometimes, except when it doesn't work. What do we do with that? What do we have to say about that? So that's not really clear from the beginning, and so on and so forth. So the question is really, what is phonology and what is not? What should we be worried about? What generalizations should not be missed? That's the question we really have to address first. And the crucial thing is that depending on the answer you give to that question, your phonological model will look very different. So if you say everything has to be in, then you have to have a theory that is very powerful and can do all of that. If you say, no, there are certain things which phonology is not responsible for, then of course your theory will become slimmer and smaller and maybe more elegant and more beautiful. But is that relevant? Well, we don't know. And the problem is that that's really where phonologists disagree. So if you go to a phonologist conference, I mean, they get very brutal. Really. I mean, not like fighting, so people don't walk out with bloody noses, but still, people disagree a lot. And some of them say, I'm looking at, for example, kalacak, gelecek, gelecek, and that's phonological. And the other one says, no, that's just random, there is no story to be told, and no, you're an idiot, how can you say no? Okay, how do we know? We have to find out. That's really the area that phonologists disagree about the most. What is phonology? We don't really have a very good definition in place. And that's even worse, such things get even worse when people don't think about it. So very often we have certain assumptions and we take them for granted. But if we have assumptions that we don't question, then how could we ever get better? I mean, we just live on and we just say, okay, that's what we've always done, so therefore we'll also do it for the next 500 years. Well, that's not what science is meant to be. It's meant to be about progress. It's meant to be about questioning things. It's meant to be asking fundamental questions. It becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to talk to other people. Therefore, what this talk will attempt to do is to spell out criteria, give us criteria to say, this is in, and we as phonologists are responsible, and the other things are out. Somebody else will have to deal with them. And we already have an offering from the syntacticians because they say, we will not, they didn't. April's first. Huh?
Yeah, I know.
Fine. Okay, now, let's go back in time a little bit, and let's see if I can do something clever here now. Yes, I can. Let me move this, no, Windows, oh God. No, I have to close this as well. Okay, have you seen these two people before? I mean, before this talk.
Not alive.
Okay, no, okay. The guy here is Chomsky. The guy here is Howard. Fantastic. And together they wrote a book which was called The Sound Pattern of English, published in 1968. Kind of, no, that's not what I want. That's what I want. F11. F11, fantastic. Okay. So in this book, and that was basically the foundation for generative phonology, and they said what we have to look at as phonologists are alternations. Alternations, alternations, alternations, alternations. What is an alternation? No, I don't have one. Okay. So let me give you an example of alternations and then come back. So for example, alternation would be, think of what you have with English cats, with a z, not with a s, sorry, but dogs with a z. So there is an alternation. One is s, the other one is z. How are the two related? That would be an example of an alternation. Or think of Turkish. One case you have lar, the other one you have lar. Okay? In one case you have d, in the other case you have t. Or di, or ti, or du, or tu, or du, or tu. And then you're surprised that foreigners don't learn Turkish. Thank you very much. Okay, that would be an example of an alternation. Or for example, for English we have electric with a K, but electricity with an S. Or we have serene with a long E, but serenity with an A. All of these would be examples of alternations. Okay, let's go back to this. And what Chomsky and Halley in their book said is, well, what we have to look for is underlying representations. So for example, for electric and electricity, we have to find a common core, something they have in common, and then we derive each form from them with the help of rules. Okay, that was deemed as something very important, that we as phonologists are responsible for looking at such alternations. And this was taken to a point where you could almost call this the central dogma of generative phonology. A dogma, as I'm sure you know, is an assumption which you believe in so much that you don't feel the need to question it. Okay, that's what a dogma is. And the dogma was basically, well, if two forms are morphologically related and phonetically similar, they must be derived from a common underlying representation. So to look at the examples again, you would say, well, z and s. Okay, they're clearly morphologically related. I mean, they both mean plural. Good, okay. Are they similar to each other? Yeah, I mean, z and s, not too far away from each other. So what do you have to say? You have to say it's really one shape, and then you have rules which either give you z or they give you s. And the rule could say, for example, make the z voiceless if you have a voiceless consonant before, something like that. Okay? So far, so good. Or in Turkish, you could say, well, lar and lar, they're really the same thing, but then you have a rule that tells you after the following vowels, choose lar, after the other vowels, choose lar. True? Yeah. Okay. And we can prove such rules, of course. That is, if I make up a Turkish word that you've never heard, so for example, let's say I make up a Turkish word, the Turkish word is hek. Is that a Turkish word?
No.
No. Do you know? Would you agree on the plural of hek? Assume this is a hek.
Lar.
Okay, what would it be?
Lar.
Heklar. Could it be heklar? No way. How do you know that? You've never heard the word. Oh, magic. No, not magic. Phonological rule. That's the idea. Okay, so that we're capturing something that is of significance. Okay. And people like Kenstowicz, and that's the quote in the middle, then said, well, if the alternations are regular, then we assume that the morpheme has a unique underlying representation such that the various phonetic shapes arise from sound changes introduced by context-sensitive phonological rules. Basically, it just means what we've just said. The assumption would be, well, for example, in the case of English plural, z and s, they count as the same, and they have one shape, and then you get the two different shapes by applying a rule, for example, one that says, take the z, make it voiceless after another voiceless consonant. Okay? That would be the idea here. But the problem is, or the crucial word here is, if the alternations are regular. Well, what does regular mean? And that again is not quite clear. So does regular mean exceptionless? Well, I don't think so, because if we read their book, they give us rules for electric going to electricity. So they say every time you have a K followed by E, it goes to C. Now that can't be right. Why? Because English has no problems with a word like king. K followed by E. Doesn't go to sing. Or if you say kick, and I'm kicking him all the time, then that doesn't go to I'm kissing him all the time. Okay, that doesn't happen, truth? So what kind of rule is that? I mean, it cannot really be regular. Or could you say, well, no, it only applies with certain suffixes. Well, that cannot be right either. So let's take, for example, classic with a K, but classicist. Okay? K goes to S. So you could say, aha, every time I add ist, I must change my K to S. Okay, let's try that. A Turk. And somebody dealing with Turks is a Turkist and not a Turcist. That doesn't work either. Okay, so something here is a problem. You can't even say, oh, it's specific to certain suffixes. Well, does it mean it has to be productive? Productive means it applies to novel forms. So when you make up a word or when you borrow a word, would it apply? Well, again, the answer is not quite clear because, for example, what happens with this KS? For example, in electricity, what happens if you make up a new word? And people have tested this. So they've made up new words, like, for example, blick. They said this is an adjective. And then they asked people, what's the abstract quality of being blick? And 50% said blickety, you know, the blickety of the situation. And the other 50% said blicity. I mean, I'm not sure about the 50%, but I mean, it was sort of divided between the two. Okay? And, okay, so sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't do it. Oh, well, what does that help us then? I mean, then we're not really making a generalization. Then we're just tossing a coin and we say, okay, whatever is the outcome, that's what we do. So what really is a regular alternation? We don't really mean. We don't really know. That's what I want to say. We don't really mean. Okay, so really the question should have been answered from a different direction. What Sound Pattern of English did is, it basically went through grammars, took, for example, a grammar of Turkish and said, where do I find alternations? Oh, here. Okay, alternation. Good. I need to write a rule. Next one. Okay, alternation. Okay, I write the next rule. And so on and so forth. But they never stepped back and said, well, let us first think what we want from a theory. A theory, to be a good theory, should be restrictive. A theory shouldn't allow everything. A theory should only allow certain things. That is, instead of just saying, oh, there are all these alternations, all these changes out there, let's try and make sure that we describe them all, they should have asked, they should have come from the other end and said, well, what can happen in phonology? What do we expect to find? What do I mean by that? Have you ever tried to study a language such as, for example, Finnish or Hungarian or something like that? Any Finno-Ugric language in this room? Anybody in this room? Fantastic. Which one?
Finnish.
Finnish, okay. Did you notice something about Finnish vowels? Vowel harmony, okay.
Yeah,
and the vowel harmony of Finnish looks very similar to Turkish, exactly. So the funny thing about language is that you take one language, you study it, you go to the next language and you say, oh my God, I've seen this before. And then you go to the third language and you say, oh, now it's getting a bit scary. Because again I see the same pattern. And the next, and the next, and the next. That is, what we as linguists have found out over the last 50 years is basically that linguistics is, or languages really only vary to a certain extent. It's not completely random. You see certain patterns again and again and again. And that's really what we want to answer. We want to understand where these patterns come from. So really we should be like physicists and say, we predict that a language can only have A, B, C, D, but nothing else. Okay? Likewise, if you have a good theory of gravity, and your theory of gravity, you take a pen, and your theory of gravity will predict that if I let the pen go, what will happen? Hopefully it will fall. If your theory of gravity says I let the pen go, and either it falls, or it shoots out of the window, or it goes, then you have a crap theory of gravity. But that's not how the world works. Okay? Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay? A theory should be as restricted as it can be. You don't want to include everything. You want to make very, very clear restrictions. That really should be the first thing that you ask. And that's the foundations of most versions of a theory called government phonology, where they really said, look, when we look at the phonology of language, we see that the same patterns repeat themselves. So really those are the patterns we should be after. That's what we should explain. Not every little detail where one word maybe potentially changes if only you add it. Okay? You really need to find what's common. You need to have a very restricted theory to do that. Okay. So people were the founding fathers. The founders of this theory of government phonology, they were very dissatisfied with the way phonology was done back then. So for example, phonology back then was, or the theory of phonology was completely arbitrary. Now let's see, have you ever seen a rule of this shape? Well, of course you have, because we had one a couple of slides back, okay? But this rule basically says A goes to B if it stands between C and D. Okay, now A can stand for everything, B can stand for everything, C can stand for everything, D can stand for everything. So this rule basically says anything can go to anything in any context. Wow, that's a very deep insight. I mean, not. Okay, that's not what you want. That's embarrassing. And why should anything go to anything? I mean, there is no connection here. What's going on? That clearly isn't a good idea. Likewise, there was this problem of overgeneration. Let's actually skip that and let's look at that. Now, if you sit down and you work out, well, how many combinations, how many different rules can you write with this general schema, then you find the answer is 6.4 times 10 to the power of 45. 10 to the power of 45. What does that mean? It's a number which has 45 zeros at the end. Just to put this in perspective, number of stars in the universe, 10 to the power of 23. Okay? Now, why is that relevant? Well, children somehow have to figure out these rules. If a child has to try out 6.4 times 10 to the power of 45 rules before he or she can speak Turkish, I mean, then that would mean none of you should actually be able to speak Turkish. But you all do. I mean, given this, it should take you, I don't know, 4 million years, or I don't know, something like that to learn Turkish. But clearly it didn't. Or maybe you're all very old and I don't know. Okay? But certainly I would assume that please, that cannot be the right number. Something here is horribly, horribly, horribly in the wrong track. And what made things worse is that these rules could even be ordered with respect to each other. So you could say one rule applies first, and then the next one applies, and then the third one applies, and then rule number 425 applies. And if you work that out, it means you have, well, the number of rules multiplied by the number of rules minus 1, multiplied by the number of rules minus 2, you get the idea. So again, this time the child wouldn't need 400 million years, the child would need 400 million years multiplied by, yet another very high number. So something here was clearly wrong. So people said, no, enough. We need to start from scratch again. We need to do something better than that. And they came up with criteria to say, here is what's in, and here is what's out. So a clear checklist, which we can go through. And this brings us to a list of criteria which we can apply to different phenomena and check if they're phonological or not. And these 4 criteria are the so-called non-arbitrariness principle, the so-called minimality hypothesis, the so-called principle of semantic transparency, and the principle of structural limitations on phonological events. You've never heard of this, don't worry, we'll go over them, okay? This is just what's going to be on the menu to give you an idea. And people very often say, oh, well, but that is so restrictive, is it really a good idea to have a restrictive theory? And I would say, yes. The more restrictive your theory can be, the better it is. You are dealing with science, you want to make predictions. Furthermore, we have to think of children. I mean, you know, not in the general way as politicians think, you know, there's nobody thinking about children. No, I mean, we have to think of children in the sense of we have to think of how they acquire language. And what we know is they do that very quickly. So how do they do that in such a short time? That's one question. The other problem that we as phonologists have to deal with is the problem of parsing. What does that mean? It means the following. If I made a break after every word, it would sound very strange. True?
Yeah.
Normally I don't. Normally I just speak without any breaks. But still you can understand me. How do you do that? How do you know where a word begins or where a word ends? I mean, we all do that effortlessly. We don't even think about it. We can all do that. For computers, that's actually very tricky. And if you look at recordings of sound, you know, it just looks like one long thing. If you've ever listened to a foreign language that you don't know, you get the impression they only have one word. And it's incredibly long. And you have no idea where one thing begins and where the other one ends. Okay, so for example, let's see, how many people in this room speak German? Okay, but you might not speak my dialect, because I come from a very strange dialect region. So for example, if I say something like, und da habe ich einen Vortrag gehalten, how many words were there? How would you know? It was all, you know, üç. 7. So, okay, well, close. Okay, okay, but my point is, we're doing something here that's actually quite amazing. And we're doing that incredibly well, at a speed which is shocking. I mean, think of, you know, I mean, here we're sort of in a civilized society and everything, but think 300,000 years ago, you know, when the mother tried to warn their children that there is a tiger coming. I mean, the child doesn't have the time to say, sorry, mommy, can you spell it out and repeat it word by word, you know. Hello, look out, there is a tiger. Too late, child is already okay? So we do that, and our survival depends on it. So this parsing, this idea that we can listen to speech and break it up, that's really crucial. Okay? Let me give you a last example of this parsing idea. Take Turkish again. Okay? So you have this phenomenon of vowel harmony. It means that, for example, everything within a word has to share certain properties. Okay? Giving you things such as görüşürüz, you know, where everything is round and everything is front. True? And that's, of course, the word that you give to American speakers because you say, let's see what they will do, and they can't do that. And they say, görüşürüz. Okay? But it means when you say görüşürüz, it's as if you say, okay, everything that shares these properties, that belongs together. As soon as you break the chain and you say görüşürüz abicim, then you know we're in the next word. You hear you know, aha, that must be one word. Now I hear ah, over, that's it. I know I'm in the next word. True?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You wouldn't expect a foreigner to say that? No? Okay. So, what are these principles? The principle of non-arbitrariness basically says there has to be a direct relationship between a phonological process and its environment. What does that mean? Well, again, and since the picture says more than 100 words, let's look at a picture. Once again, we can use Turkish as an illustration. What you want to say in a way is, okay, we either have lar or we have ler. But why do we have exactly these two choices? Well, it depends on properties of the vowel before. If the vowel before is front, then the suffix will have to be front. I mean, the vowel will have to be front. If the vowel before is back, the suffix will have to be back. It's not the reverse. There is no language on the planet which says if the vowel here is front, then your suffix must be back, and if the vowel is back, the suffix must be front. So languages only have harmony. Languages don't have anti-harmony. Why would languages do that? I mean, that would, to confuse us, but then that would be very stupid of language. So that doesn't happen, okay? So languages kind of take some information and copy it all over the place, so that even if you're not sure which vowel you heard here, you can still kind of, what's the word? You can still kind of,
Credit.
Yes, exactly. You can still kind of. So if somebody said "ler," okay, well then you didn't quite hear what I said before, but at least you know the word must have had a vowel with I, E, Ö, or U. I mean, not that that's very helpful, but it's a start. It's better than nothing. True? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. So what does this show? It basically shows the only reason why we have "ler," a front vowel, is because the vowel before is also front. The only reason why we have a back vowel here, if we have a back vowel like "lar," is because the vowel before it is also "lar." So it's not just random that Turkish gives you these two. No, it depends on the environment. Okay? You just copy things from the environment. That's what phonology usually seems to be. I'm sure you've all heard the term assimilation. And assimilation is basically, I would say 99% of all phonological phenomena deal with assimilation. It's the most crucial concept. It basically means you have some information and you copy it everywhere. You can compare it to, well, no, let's forget it. Yeah, you get the idea. Okay? The other thing that can happen is that things can break apart. Okay? So instead of the Italian example, let's take here a Turkish example. Let's take again gelecek. Gelecek. Okay? We have the vowel E. And we have reason to believe that the vowel E is composed of two simple things. Namely, it's a combination of the vowels A and E, let's say. So it's a bit like color mixing. You take yellow, you take blue, you put them together, you get green. Thank you, because I'm horribly bad at this, and I always think, blue, green, pink. Yeah, exactly, pink. Okay. So it's like mixing colors. Okay? So we have reason to, why do we know that? Well, we know that because, for example, we know that we took a suffix like "lar," which is A. We took a stem like "ip," which is E. That property was copied over, we get E. It's a bit like a mathematical equation. If you know that this is 1 and this is 2, then the addition of the two will be 3. Correct. Okay, or like color code. And you can do the reverse. So we know gelecek, E, combination of A and E. Now, in Turkish, you seem to have a problem with the A ingredient. You say, kick it out. Go away. We don't want you. Okay. You take an E, you take away the A ingredient. What are you left with? E. That's, of course, exactly what you do. You say, gelecek. You can remove things. You can lose properties. Okay? That's what you can do. You can copy them from somewhere else, or you can kick them out. But that's really all you can do. Nothing else. You cannot say something like, oh, well, if 3 syllables ahead I had the consonant P, then the vowel here will be E. No language does that. Okay? It's always about this. You have some property, you copy it elsewhere, or you lose it, or you do something else to it. Now, maybe a comparison to syntax would be easier. Okay, because people usually have a more intuitive understanding of syntax. Assume I tell you there is a language, and the subject goes to a special position in the sentence. But the subject only does that when it refers to a man with a beard. Now every syntactician in the room would say, crazy. What are you crazy? No, you're trying to fool us. No language works like that. Why can you say that? Well, because you can say that because you say having a beard or not has nothing to do with being the subject of a sentence. Okay? That's completely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with it. Okay? That is, and that's the same in phonology. So the fact that we get lar and lar is not random. All you do is you say, okay, we have a certain property in the stem, we copy that onto the suffix, that's it, can we go now? Yes, we're done. Fantastic. Okay, that's all that it has. So far so good? Okay, now, this copying of material over a long period, of course, also helps us in parsing. That's what we said before. So if you have a word like görüşürüz, and then in between you miss a bit, and I say görüşürüz, okay, you can reconstruct what was missing. Why? Because you have öz before, you have üs afterwards, so you can sort of work it out. You can do a mathematical
Operation.
Thank you. Okay. Operation, you can work it out. That's it. The other thing, of course, is if we have such a very limited system, then of course for the child it's also very easy. All the child ever has to figure out is, does my language have vowel harmony? Yes or no? Okay? And then all I need to figure out is which property is copied all over the place. That's it. Very simple. Child can, you know, the nature of the problem then all of a sudden changes, because before we were wondering, well, why does it, how can children learn language so quickly? Well, if that's all they ever do, then of course they will learn it very quickly, and now we can say, hey, you're already 2 years old and you still cannot speak better, I mean, what's going on? You get the idea? No, you don't. Maybe. That was a stupid joke, sorry. Okay. The other thing is the so-called, or the second principle is the so-called minimality hypothesis, which basically says processes apply whenever their conditions are met. It's a bit like saying it's like a natural law. If things can happen, they must happen. You can't do anything like saying, oh, there is an exception to it. And I know, of course, when people talk about Turkish in particular, and you say Turkish vowel harmony, they say, but we learned in school that there are exceptions to it. For example, we learned that the word dünya is an exception to vowel harmony. Okay, but what people never talk about is that, for example, the vowel in dünya is not really the same vowel you have in la. It's a much longer vowel. It's also a much fronter vowel. You don't say masalar. No, you don't. That would be the vowel of dünya. So really, when people talk about exceptions, that's a very lazy way of thinking, looking at things. It's a bit like saying, well, I think I have a solution, but I have some problems. Let me just say it's an exception. Goodbye, I'm gone now. Okay? And that you don't want to do. Again, that's not really the strategy you want to follow. It also excludes other things such as rule ordering, but we don't need to go into that too much. And again, if you introduce these principles to a syntactician, they won't be surprised, because the assumption, the implicit assumption in syntax is usually that syntax is exceptionless. So for example, if you have to move an auxiliary to make a question, then you wouldn't say, oh well, but it doesn't happen on a Tuesday. Then if that really is the case, then why are we doing linguistics? I mean, you know, then it's completely random anyway. Okay. Okay, let's look at the principle of semantic transparency. What is that? Looks very complicated, but really isn't, so let me give you an example. Let's look at mouse. What does mouse mean? Well, it means at least two things. It means a little, you know, animal that goes quick, quick, quick and eats cheese, but it can also be this here. True? Okay. Now we come to the crucial question of what is the plural of mouse?
Two versions.
Well, actually, there are two versions. Okay, why? Because if you talk about the little fare, then that can only be mice. If you talk about this, you have a choice. You could be talking about computer mice, or you could be talking about computer mouses. Likewise, assume you have a comic book and there are 3 Mickey, well, what now? 3
Mickey Mice.
Mickey Mice, actually no, people usually reject them. They say, no, we really prefer Mickey Mouses. Okay? So the meaning of mouse and the meaning of mice is, strictly speaking, slightly different. Okay? Mouse can mean all of these things. Mice, not so clear that that's really the case. Now, mouse and mice are very different from each other in their shape. And nobody would say, oh, English has a rule that says if you want to make the plural, change "au" to "I." Because then I can also say, I bought one house, but tomorrow I will buy 2 highs. And if you say that to an English speaker, they will have no idea what you're talking about. It just does not work. Okay? Completely impossible. So these two forms, it's random. They look similar, but that's the end of it. Or take Turkish ben, but bana. Okay, you don't say bene. You could have said, or maybe there are dialects where you say bene. I don't know. Not even dialects. Denizli. Okay, okay. They are sensitive people. I like them. Okay. But, you know, there is no problem with bene. It just happens that that's not the form you use. There are dialects of Turkish which do it. It's just, there is no problem here. It's just that that's, go could have a past tense like gold. It's just that it doesn't. You have to say went, and so on and so forth. So there is really no problem here to speak of. Let's look at German again. German has something very nasty. And, well, German actually has many things which are very nasty, which is, of course, why it's such a wonderful language for linguists, because we can say, haha, we can do so many things with it. We can torture students, we can look at it, we can do this, that, the other thing. So, for example, in German we have the word Nase, nose, okay? And you can make an adjective out of it, which would be either nasig or nesig. Okay? You add ig, and then the stem vowel either changes or it doesn't change. Okay? And you can then put that together with a word like flach, which means flat. So flachnasig would be flat-nosed. And it literally means somebody has a flat nose. Okay? So for example, they ran against something and then chonk, you know, it's flat. Okay. Hochnäsig literally means high-nosy, with a high nose. What is a high nose? I mean, does that mean the nose is somewhere up here? Or what is it? Yes. It really means something like arrogant. Okay, so if you're hochnäsig, it means you're saying, I'm better than everybody else. Okay? Isn't there something like küçük, dağlar? Exactly, that's the kind.
We also say burnu kalkık.
Oh, right, you have that too? Yeah. Okay, so you get the idea. Okay, now why is that relevant for us? Okay, let's look here at the A as opposed to the E. Okay. The A can change to an E. We have nasig from nase, but we also have nesig, also from nase. Now the interesting thing is, as soon as you change the vowel, the meaning also gets somewhat metaphorical. You don't get the literal meaning anymore. You don't get the meaning of, oh, he really has a high nose. No, it's more like he behaves as if he could walk around with a high nose. Something like that. Okay? All these cases where the vowel changes, their meaning is somewhat removed. It's not what you would expect. It's not, as we say, it's not compositional. Okay? Now, why is that of relevance for us as phonologists? It's relevant because it basically means, well, the question is, nasig, nesig, is there a phonological rule here that takes A to E? Is it somehow a problem that speakers cannot say nasig, so therefore they have to say nesig? No. It's just random. There is no pattern to be told. It is not a problem that you have A followed by ig, it's just you have both options. And if you make the change, well then actually your meaning will also be different. It's a bit like mouse and mice. So far so good? Okay. Okay, let's skip all of this and let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, because I don't want to go into too many cases here, but let's look at some case studies and let's apply these principles now and let's see what's going on in various phenomena. Okay, we begin with Turkish. Okay, and again we begin with Turkish because we are in Turkey. We have a Turkish audience. You all know Turkish so much better than I do. So if I try to trick you, you will know. And of course I'm not tricking you. And we begin with the famous K0 alternation in Turkish. Okay. Now, Turkish speakers usually tell me, oh, our language is so easy and it's so simple to learn and you as a foreigner should learn it so easily, no problems, everything is regular, it's not like German, it's not like English. And then we hit this. And then I say, thank you very much. That's very kind of you for giving me that. Okay, what's going on here? We have a word like dilek, but delay. I don't need to explain that to you. But we have dilekler. Okay. So what could one say? One could say, well, for example, K disappears between two vowels. Dilek, not between two vowels. Dilekler, not between two vowels. But dileki, no, we don't like that. K, you have to go away. Delay. Okay? And that's the way it is usually presented in most discussions of the phenomenon. Problem is only that that's not true. So, one question we could ask is, well, if K is such a problem between two vowels, how can you ever say sokak? I mean, we have a K here, we actually have two Ks, and the first one is between two vowels. And I don't think there is any Turkish speaker in the room who says sokak sounds somehow strange. I would rather say soak. True? You know, so there is no problem here. Likewise, textbooks or grammars will tell you monosyllabic words don't change. So we say ak, but ak. And that rule is good up to the point where it's no longer any good, because of course there are also words where something does change. So gök, but gö. And chok and cho. True? But not ok and oh, no, oku. Okay? So sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we have a phonological problem here? Well, phonological problem would mean it should be completely exceptionless. That's certainly not the case. It should also mean that there is some problem with you saying things, for example, like a instead of ak, but there is no such problem. You can say ak, completely fine. You can also say sokak. There is nothing in Turkish, bless you, there is nothing where a Turkish speaker says, oh God, a K between two vowels, I cannot handle that, I have to get rid of it. That doesn't happen. Okay? And the clearest case of chaos is that when you look at verbs. Okay? So if you take a verbal stem like bak, as in bakmak, there is no way anybody will ever say tomorrow bajak. No. I mean, you probably don't even know what that means. Yeah, or it would mean something completely different. Okay. Now, why is that an interesting case to look at? It's an interesting case to look at because for the longest time, people have looked at this and had said, well, how can we solve this? What kind of rule could we write that explains exactly the cases we can have and not the cases that we don't have? And for a long time, going back to the 60s, people have been fighting about this and have said, the rule has to look one way, it has to look another way, or we're not really sure. So, for example, some people have said, well, can we say K goes to nothing in certain contexts? Well, obviously we cannot say that because sokak. A K doesn't go to nothing. You don't say soak. So that rule won't work. So could we say, well, it only happens when the vowel is in the next morpheme? No, we cannot say that either because we have ak, ak, but g, g. In both cases the accusative ending, but the stem does different things. So that won't help us either. So then at some point Lees said, oh, let me say something really clever. You know, I'll do two things at the same time and that will solve the problem once for all. And he said, well, what if we said the word dilek is really dileg with a g? And then Turkish has a rule that says make the g at the end of a word to a k. And there is some evidence that that makes sense from a point of view of Turkish. But if it's a real K, like in sokag, you don't touch that real K. Okay, so he made a distinction between the two. Problem is that doesn't work either. Why? Because Turkish does have g's between vowels as well. So you can't say, oh, they are a problem. So people have, Turkish has gezegen. People, you have gaga, egemen, ege, sigorta, sigara. Yes, of course, many of them are loans. But for all I know, nobody would say, no Turkish speaker would say, oh, gezegen, very complicated word, let me rather say gezeyen. Or I cannot say gaga, I must say ga. Or I cannot do sigorta. For me it has to be siorta. I've never heard that in a million years. And I've played this game with gezegen. You know, I took students and I said, look at gezegen, what is your intuition about it? And they said many things. They said, oh, I think it's a long word. Okay, yes, it's a long word. And I think it has a suffix. Yes, okay, it has a suffix. And I think it comes from gezmek. Yes, that's also true because a gezegen is something that gezes. Okay? All of them true. There was not one who said gezegen is weird, it's a bad Turkish word, it doesn't sound right. Nothing of that sort. So really there doesn't seem to be any pressure to get rid of the good. And the clearest case of how futile it is to talk about the phonological thing here is if you go to nouns and verbs. Why? Let's take a stem like gerek. And that's a wonderful stem because it can be a noun, a verb, or an adjective. Hooray, hooray. Okay. If it's a noun, you can get rid of the K. You can say gerei. True? If it is a verb, you can't get rid of the K. You can't say gereyecek or gereir or whatever. No, it has to be gerekir. Okay? What does that show us? It shows us that yes, there might be rules for when it happens and when it doesn't happen, but there is no way you could ever say it has to do with the phonological shape or it's easier to pronounce one or the other. That doesn't seem to be an issue. Okay? So there is no phonological story involved here. Now let me actually, what do I want to do? Let me, yes, okay. Should we talk about that? Yes, let's quickly talk about that. So the question is then, well, if we say that that's not a phonological problem, what do we lose? Or what else do we say? Well, it is quite clear that things change here. And it's quite clear that you also do it to new things. So wonderful two new words borrowed into Turkish, blog, as on the internet, and block, as in block not. Okay, or block as in building. Okay. If I'm informed correctly, for both of them we would say blow. True?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. Okay. Now what does that mean? It means you can extend this pattern to new things. But it doesn't seem to mean that that makes it phonological. That is, yes, you extend such patterns, but you don't do it because you feel that bloku or blogu would sound un-Turkish. You can live with oku, so that can't be the problem. Okay? So just because you extend the pattern is no guarantee for what it actually is. Okay, just to give you a flavor of the song and dance that people had to go through. Engin Cesar in 1981 said, I have finally found the rule which explains everything about Turkish K nothing. That's the rule. And the rule looks very scary, and the rule basically says, if something is minus sonant, minus labial, minus coronal, minus voice, basically means if something is a K, then get rid of it. If before it you have something that is a vowel, then at least 0 consonants, then again something that is a vowel but not long, and then there is a morpheme boundary, and then there is another syllable. If you are allowed to write a rule like that, you're allowed to write any rule. If this is possible, anything is possible. If that's a possible phonological thing, then there is no limit to what language should look like. You should expect that you learn French and they tell you, in French, if a word begins with P, then at the end you have to have an M. No, there is no such thing. It's completely crazy. Okay? This is insane. Trying to say that that's a generalization is kind of tricky. Okay. Now, and the problem is the rule, he was wrong. He said the rule covers everything, but actually the rule doesn't cover everything. Okay. Now, I have many more cases, but as a matter of fact, since I see I'm already well ahead of time, let's skip many, and let's just look at one more very quickly. And what do I want to look at? No, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that, and we certainly don't want that, and we certainly, what do we want then? Do we have another Turkish? No, we don't have another Turkish. No. Well, then let's come to the conclusion right away. The point is, okay. So what's the idea? What was I trying to say? What I was trying to say is that we need criteria. We can't just go out there like young children and say, oh, I see a flower, oh, I see a bird, oh, I see a bee, oh, I see... That's not how you do science. That's not how you can do phonology. You can't just go out there and say, everything I see, I somehow have to worry about. No, that's not the way you do it. You do it like a scientist. You say, what are my expectations I can find in the world? So for example, I expect that languages can have vowel harmony, but that always means you copy one property of a vowel to another property. Fine, okay, let's see if that's true. If you're wrong, well, as the old scientific saying says, shit happens. you go back home and you say, sorry, I was wrong, I have to rethink my assumptions. That's normal. Okay? But you need an agenda. It's like going on a trip. When you go on a trip, you first think, I want to see A, B, and C. And you don't just say, let me go somewhere. I mean, you know, then that won't help you very much. So what I've tried to show here is that this theory has criteria that allows us to come with such a checklist and say, this is what we really expect phonology to do. And, you know, we can't really talk about that. What we have to live with as phonology is that not that all that glitters is gold, as the saying goes. We can't simply go out and say, oh, I see this, I see that, I see that, now I'm responsible for it. And we also won't take it from the syntacticians any longer and they say, hey, there is something that glitters, phonologists do something about it. We won't do that anymore. I hereby renounce that for once and for all. On the other hand, we can hope that the criteria we've used can finally give us an idea of what these significant generalizations are that we really are after. Namely, they have to be something that helps us to understand how we parse. That is why you don't need breaks between words, and still you can understand me. Okay, that's what we need. We also need something that can help us to understand how language acquisition works. And by being open about it, by spelling out what these criteria are, we can hope that we can actually communicate with other people, communicate maybe even with syntacticians, morphologists, and so on and so forth, to find the solution to what to do. And as the French say, qui trop embrasse, mal étreint. And since it's French, it always has to do with love. Okay, qui trop embrasse, mal étreint means she or he who embrace. If you embrace too much, if you try to embrace too much, you hug badly. Okay? So if you're trying to do too many things at the same time, then that's a bad idea. Clearly a principle I've violated here as well, because I tried to give you so many other things, but hey, I live and I learn, I go back, and I say, okay, that was too much, but next time I'll do it better. Okay, anyway, I hope you still got something out of it. The last thing I have to say is, thank you very much for your time.
Sorusu olan var mı arkadaşlar?
I will just give you an example about this problem that you complain about.
Okay.
For example, there is still dispute about this background elements in Turkish. There is one literature that says, okay, it's related to syntax, and there is one literature that says, okay, it's just kind of PF movement. You don't care about it. So this is one of the problems that we have to face with as a syntactician. For example, in my PhD dissertation, I just assumed the idea that it's just kind of PF movement, so I don't care about it.
Yes, but that's exactly, you know, you could call that the kind of garbage bin mentality to other stuff. You know, no offense. Okay,
yeah,
so
I know.
Yeah, but you know, that's the way syntacticians usually deal with it. They say, oh, it's a phenomenon which doesn't really fit into our model. Let's just say somebody else has to deal with it. Okay, now that, you know, of course you're free to do that, or syntacticians are free to do that. But then on the other hand, you know, just because you tell us we have to do it, doesn't mean we really have to do it. So, but yeah, it's a very widespread, a very common thing. What it is, or who should be responsible for it, and that would be something that really we should talk about. And say, okay, what does it really look like? Because it could also mean there is something we're completely missing. Okay? Maybe it's neither one nor the other, but something third that we haven't explored yet. But yeah, it's extremely common.
Well, this is also valid in the literature on scrambling. For example, 20 years ago, let's say 30 years ago, nobody says that, okay, scrambling is directly related to syntax. It's the kind of topic that matters in phonology.
Yes.
But recently, the basic idea is that, okay, it is also syntax.
But the crucial thing here, I think, is this. The reason why people rethink such things is that they go back to their original assumptions of what should be in and what should be out. Okay? That, you know, when people say, no, we think it really should be syntax, then they usually have a reason for why they change their mind. But you can only change your mind, you can only improve that if you go back to your basic assumptions and you say, what did I get wrong in the first place? The problem in linguistics is that very often people don't do that. Okay? So they say, for example, oh, when I was a student, I learned everything that has to do with sound is phonology. Now, I couldn't... Huh?
No, it's not.
Exactly, I agree with you, but that's, you know, that's the assumption many people have, including phonologists. Okay? So even phonologists have this idea, just because it's about sound, we have to deal with it. I would strongly disagree. Go, went. The sounds are different. Okay, does that mean it's a phonological problem? No, it just means that's a completely isolated, irregular form of English you have to learn. There is no extraction, no generalization, nothing you can learn. It's completely, you know, it's a freak of nature. That's the best I can say. But what I'm trying to say is that you can only do that if you're aware of why you want to let certain things in and certain things out. So when you say 20 years ago scrambling was not considered syntactic, why? You know, what has changed?
Well, maybe some data, I don't know, they encounter, give them the idea that, okay, it must be related to syntax. I don't know. Maybe some observations.
Okay, then that reflects well on syntacticians, because it means they deal with a new problem, they realize, oh no, we did something stupid in the past, so let's change it.
This is dependent on the point of view that you're studying a topic.
Of
For
course,
example,
sure.
If you're looking at, let's say, stress in a sentence, you have two ways, right? You have to look at it from the point of view of phonology, so let's call it like phonosyntax.
Sure.
But if you are a syntactician, then it's something like syntactico-phonology, right?
Yes, true. But I mean, I think stress in a sentence is the clearest example that what we need is not this kind of garbage bin mentality, but really cooperation.
Yes.
Because I think the only way we can ever solve that is by saying, okay, we really need to understand what are the syntactic ingredients, we really need to understand what are the phonological ingredients, and where do the two meet. Okay? But saying from, that's...
But this is the basic problem in every kind of study. For example, let's assume physics. If you have an experimental problem, then you say, okay, I can't solve this problem, so it's a kind of theoretical problem. So I mustn't deal with that. Let's assume that, for example, you encounter a data which is kind of complex. So as a syntactician, I saw the data, I see the data, and I say, okay, maybe a kind of phonological interaction is related here, so you know, I don't have to deal with that. Okay, but that is, it's tempting to use that, it's very tempting to use that as an excuse, as a way out. Okay?
Escape hatch. As an escape hatch, exactly. And I think the problem is using these escape hatches and thinking everything is okay with it. It's in a way similar to, please let me quickly go back to César's rule about K0. Because I think it's so telling. Gold. Here we go. Okay. If you look at this rule, okay? Now, in those days, César really honestly believed he had come up with a good generalization. But that is not really what you want to ask. You don't really want to say, okay, do I have the generalization? Or you want to go the next step and you want to say, well, actually this generalization is fairly complex. And it takes in a number of factors, some of which aren't even phonological. So for example, you have to know about where one morpheme ends and where the other one begins. Am I really happy with that? That's the next step you should take. Or one should take, not you, but one should take. And that's the step which many people usually don't take. You know, they say, all I need is an analysis, now I can have a beer. Understandable, we're all humans. Okay, we want to have some fun. But that is not where it should be.
But you always have this risk. I mean, you're studying on an intuitional data.
You have but you have the risk made possible by a theory that allows you to write that in the first place. A good theory should already have said, watch out, watch out, watch out, there is a problem. If you have a syntactic theory that says a subject can raise to spec TP if it's a man with a beard.
No, of course.
Yeah, but you say, of course, okay? But you only say, of course, because you have a good syntactic theory, which immediately says that's nonsense, okay? It has a warning lamp inbuilt. This one didn't. And people abused that heavily. They said, let's just, you know, run it against the wall and still we can do it. You can write any rule you wish with this and its opposite and the opposite of the opposite of the opposite. That's not a theory. That would be the equivalent to the man with a beard raising to speak. You know, and as a syntactician, you would immediately say, no. You're kidding. That can't be right.
Have the recent developments in Chomsky framework had any influence on GP? And by recent, I mean 93 onwards. Minimalism.
Yes and okay. Yes and no. So here is the issue. The issue is that you know, phonologists very often have a kind of inferiority complex. So they look up to syntacticians and say, hey, the syntacticians, they can do these really cool things. And they have, I don't know, feature checking. And they have this, and they have that, and they have that. And maybe we as phonologists can do something similar. Okay? So yes, there have been attempts to, for example, integrate the idea of feature checking. But it's unclear to me to what extent you can really do that. So let me give you an example where that would be, for example, relevant. Okay? So take the vowels of English. Okay? You have a vowel like beat with an E and a vowel like bit with an E. Okay? Now, the E of beat can be at the end of the word. You can say B. B is a good English word. B is not a good English word. So the short E cannot be at the end of an English word. So people have tried to say, well, isn't that a bit like being a transitive verb or an intransitive verb? If you're an intransitive verb, you can stand on your own, you don't need a complement. If you're a transitive verb, you will need a complement. It's a bit like saying the vowel in bit needs to be followed by something, for example, T, so that the whole thing is well formed. Okay? Now, once you have that in place, you could say, well, is that some kind of feature check? So yes, of course, there have been, and I think that's the way forward. I think the way forward is to say what happens in other fields, and do they do something interesting that you could apply to your own thing? I think as a linguist, you should be able to not only deal with your little world, but also with other areas of linguistics, so that you can make comparison, because that's the only way you're ever going to make a step forward. So yes, the attempts have been made. The question, of course, is how good are they? Time will tell. We'll see.
Markus hocamıza bu hem bilgilendirici hem de eğlenceli konuşması için çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Plaketini takdim etmek üzere yardımcı doçent doktor Özgün KOŞANER'i sahneye